James Madison once said, "War contains so much folly as well as wickedness that much is to be hoped from the progress of reason."
And the progress of reason has culminated in presidential war. Presidential war. What is it good for? Intellectual stimulation. Say it again now. Presidential war. What is it good for? This game is the nation. Presidential war. Hello and welcome to another exciting installment of Presidential War. For the Dead Presidents Podcast, I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I am James J. Hamilton.
That's right, and it's America's favorite presidential educational card game, Presidential War. And we're back yet again with another exciting installment. This time around, we're going to be playing the 3-category draw variation. 3 categories will be face up on the table, and we will pick 3 cards from our hand and allocate them to whichever category we think they fit best and see how it goes. This should be very exciting. Strap in. It's Presidential War. All right, the decisions have been made. Our first category, who would you hire as your lawyer if you were accused of murder?
Well, I went with Lyndon B. Johnson.
There you go. And I went with Herbert Clark Hoover.
I think either of these men were actually lawyers.
That's right.
Which-
I went with Hoover because I felt that his calm demeanor, his, look at the way he handled things during the First World War. Mm-hmm. He had things in order. He was an organized man. Presidency aside, that didn't really work out too great, but if he were to be your lawyer, I think he would get your things together. And he would be that, maybe he'd be like Gregory Peck. He could be that soft-spoken, humble lawyer that kind of appeals to the hearts of the jury. Mm-hmm. Johnson maybe would be your crass, well, he says this, but let me tell you something now. Mm-hmm. And he'd have a counter. He'd be suave. He'd be slick. He'd be hard to beat. It would be it'd be a great Perry Mason episode, but I see Hoover as Perry Mason.
Yeah, I could see Johnson as more of the villainous opposing counsel of Perry
Johnson,
Mason.
The Hamilton Burger of this category.
Yeah, I'm hoping that maybe Johnson will bribe the jury to get me off.
Well, in his early days, maybe, but, he wouldn't have done it himself, of course.
I'm banking on maybe Johnson, who got away with murdering President Kennedy, get me off.
Well, he's a smooth-talking, back-slapping guy. Mm. He's intimidating. He'd be a very effective counsel.
Yeah. Yeah, for 2 guys who weren't lawyers.
Yeah.
We didn't do too bad in our choices.
Mm-mm. Not at all. I think this would be quite a matchup in the courtroom, but who would the jury fall for? Would it be the plain-spoken Herbert Hoover, who I see as the Perry Mason in this example? Or would it be the smooth-talking Lyndon Johnson? And that's, I don't want to put down Hamilton Burger too much. I mean, it sucks that he lost all the time, but...
Yeah.
Johnson...
He's the Washington Generals of lawyering.
Yeah. This would be a good... I'd love to see these two go head-to-head in a trial. What if these two did the Murdaugh trial?
Yeah. Yeah, I could see Johnson as Murdaugh's defense lawyer.
Yeah. he probably would have been more effective.
Yeah, I might give Hoover a slight edge in this category.
I don't know. I just feel like Hoover would be a little bit more homespun, maybe. Like, in some way, he might connect with the jury more than Johnson's it would be your that's what you expect to see in, like, a TV show defense attorney.
Yeah.
And we'll go with Hoover here. Who but Hoover?
Hoover will get the victory.
And now we're going to move on to whose family member would make the best president. This was an interesting choice on my part. I chose Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings.
Wow.
Boom. Try and fight against that one, you racist.
All right. Well, I had John Tyler.
Oh, of course you did.
So I'm going to go with his father, John Tyler Sr., who was governor of Virginia, was a friend and admirer of Thomas Jefferson, and an owner of many people like Sally Hemings.
Well, all right. So in my case, Sally Hemings, a strong, independent woman of color who is also the lover of her master. Could she be privy to anything? Does Jefferson talk to her about his problems? Who knows? But if you don't think that she would make the best president, you're a racist.
Yeah, that could be the case. I have to advocate against Sally Hemings and in favor of the slave-owning John Tyler Sr., but he did have more political experience than Sally Hemings. He was governor of Virginia, a U.S. Circuit Court judge for Virginia, vigorously supported the American Revolution and the Bill of Rights.
Well, you know what, James? What we need is an outsider, not same old, you know. And when I say same old, I'm referring to white men. It's time for a strong black woman to take the reins of this country and lead it in the right direction. And that woman is Sally Hemings, hypothetically.
Yep.
And I think she trounces John Tyler Sr. in this category. Because if she doesn't win, you're a bigot.
Can't argue with that.
Sally Hemings, making the better president.
Sally Hemings, the next president of the United States.
Better than John Tyler Sr. And that'll bring us to our third and final category in this draw. Who would you pick first in flag football?
I went with Harry Truman.
And I went with George H.W. Bush.
He was on our top 5 presidential athletes.
Indeed he was. Nice build and in pretty good shape. And it helped him out during the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bush, bigger of a baseball star.
Right.
But pretty athletic, comes from a pretty athletic family. He's pretty tall.
Yeah, he's built pretty good.
An excellent choice for flag football. Harry Truman. He's a World War I veteran.
Indeed.
Nothing to sneeze at.
No. As long as he's got his spectacles on.
Yeah. He's 5'10", 185 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, average.
Nothing to sneeze at.
No.
Maybe not as well known for his athleticism.
Perhaps not.
Complete Book of U.S. Presidents says that he would walk 2 miles every morning.
And that was a brisk walk.
At the rapid clip of 128 steps per minute.
That's it. He would agree to interviews, and if they could keep up with him.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in shape. I mean, he wasn't... I don't know that he was like... If you're looking at the athletic he is, I don't know that he was necessarily on par with George H.W. Bush.
No.
I think I would pick Bush before I would pick Truman in flag football.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Bush, the more storied athlete. College World Series.
Indeed.
Trumping the speed walking prowess of Harry Truman.
Yeah. That's it. So we got 3 new categories coming up and 3 new cards to draw.
What could happen? Anything could happen on Presidential War.
That's just it. So we will make our choices here. Fuck. This is terrible. I wish that the viewer could see the categories in my cards, because this is ridiculous.
Well, they're going to find out. Well, you swept the first 3 categories. Maybe it's my turn.
Yeah, it very well could be, because we're going to have to go back and explain my decisions here, because this is really fucking hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god. Okay. I don't think I agree with any of them necessarily. Well, kinda, but I wanted to put different people in different places, but the other options would not allow me to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So we begin with, who would you rather have date your daughter?
I'm going with Andrew Jackson.
There we go. Andrew Jackson. And I went with at the time of this recording, still amongst us, man amongst all people of every race, every gender, every faith. That great human being, James Earl Carter Jr. A good, solid man with a focus on helping others. He's had a loving marriage, lo these many years, to his, at this time of recording, still alive wife, Rosalind. He's a good man. He comes from a humble background. He understands hard work. He's a smart kid. Look at his work in the Naval Academy there.
Mm-hmm.
And just an all-around good person.
Your daughter would be looking at all the peanuts she could eat.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Look at these nuts, baby.
Pretty good prospect, Jimmy Carter.
I think so.
There's Andrew Jackson, the more fiery, fiercely protective of his woman.
Yeah.
If your daughter had a shady ex-boyfriend who was hanging around, you could count on Andy Jackson to threaten him.
Yeah.
And,
as we've discussed before,
challenge him to
infamous
a duel.
phone call between father and daughter, where daughter has to reveal to father that her boyfriend shot and killed a man.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andrew Jackson, a son-in-law that you could be proud of for killing a man.
Perhaps.
Yeah, he was certainly a very loving husband.
Fiercely devoted, of course.
Yeah. Would protect your daughter against any enemies.
Yeah, he would.
He'd marry her even if she was still technically married to someone else.
Yeah, he would.
He would take all the heat and do anything that he could.
The question is, do you want to deal with that, or do you want to deal with Jimmy Carter?
Yeah. Well, another consideration, Andy Jackson, possibly infertile, did not father any children. If you
true.
as a father are looking forward to grandchildren, you might not get any from Andy Jackson.
Yeah, that's true.
I think all those considerations.
He might adopt a Native American child whose family he slayed.
Yeah. You have that to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. So there's that. So as a father,
You got Jimmy Carter, who would
Peanuts
never slay an Indian family.
That's right. And between him and his brother, Peanuts and beer,
Yeah.
football night. Mm-hmm. Let's go. Jimmy Carter takes the hand.
I agree with that.
And next up, we have the original category, Best President Overall.
Yeah, when we first invented presidential war, there were no categories. It was just going head to head as who's the best president.
That's right.
On every hand.
Maybe we'll play a game like that this season. Just OG presidential war.
Cool. Well, this hand I'm going with Ronald Reagan.
Okay, and he's going up against Zachary Taylor.
Wow.
So, Zachary Taylor, as our listeners will remember from episode 12, definitely an underrated president. Mm-hmm. He is better than what history remembers him for. That being said, however, Ronald Reagan holds a special place in the hearts of many American people. Now, there are those that love him, there are those that loathe him, but those that love him really fucking love him. You know, there are a lot of people who would say Ronald Reagan made you proud to be an American.
Yeah. Ronald Reagan's America was a shining city on a hill. And he was pretty successful, winning 49 states in his re-election campaign.
Indeed.
Taking down the Soviet Union, reforming the American economy. The benefits of Ronald Reagan's presidency are trickling down on us to this day.
Yeah.
And he didn't die halfway through his first term like Zachary Taylor did.
Yeah, he was shot.
Yeah, Reagan surviving an assassination attempt. Zachary Taylor not surviving a
Milk
big load of ice cream.
and cherries.
Yep.
Iced milk, I should say. But, yeah, I don't think there's really much of an argument here. I don't think that anybody would be able to convince anybody else that Zachary Taylor was a better president than Ronald Reagan. Despite all of Reagan's flaws, and there are flaws. That being said, though, it's got to go Reagan.
Reagan gonna take this category.
And that's going to bring us to who would make the best Secretary of State? Now, this is where I was trying to mix and match, because I thought, well, maybe this card would be for who could date your daughter. And then I was like, oh, wait, what happened to that girl that he dated? Oh, she killed herself.
Yeah.
But he was not a great Secretary of State, and he certainly wasn't the best president overall. It's James Buchanan.
Wow. Well, and I went with the winner of this category from the previous episode, John Adams.
There it is.
Who will now be 2-0.
He absolutely will be.
And still the only person to win this category since it was introduced in Presidential War.
That's right. And that's just facts. Buchanan, able, but fussy and argumentative. Not what you want. John Adams would be brilliant in that post. No question about it. This isn't even an argument. This is a John Adams victory.
Yeah. John Adams, one of the most experienced diplomats of his age. So good that he fathered the actual best Secretary of State.
Yeah.
If he himself had had the chance to serve, would have undoubtedly been an excellent Secretary of State.
And he would have been happier at that than he would have been at Vice President.
Right. And even as President, he went over the head of his Secretary of State to conclude peace with France.
Indeed.
When other members of his party wanted war.
There it is.
An excellent diplomat to the end. John Adams taking the category.
And 3 more coming up.
What could happen next on Presidential War?
Okay, first up, we got First Lady looks.
I'm going with Chester Arthur, bringing to the table the great Southern belle, Nell Arthur.
And I am going with Benjamin Harrison, bringing to the table Caroline Harrison.
I'm going to have to resort to Google Images to refresh my recollection on Caroline Harrison's
Indeed.
physical appearance.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Caroline Harrison, a respectable woman. I don't have to look up to remember Nell Arthur.
No, indeed not, no.
Her
Let me take a gander at Caroline Harrison there. Oof.
A loving mother and wife, an excellent first lady. But Nell Arthur,
Nell Arthur will take the cake.
who died before she had a chance to serve as first lady,
Yeah.
but still counts.
Yeah, charming and beautiful Southern belle, Nell Arthur.
That's right. And she's going to take this category. Which
And
brings
then it'll bring us to who would win in a fight.
I'm going Dwight D. Eisenhower.
He's going up against Barack Obama.
Wow.
How are them lungs, Ike? Obama smokes too, but hey, he quit.
Yeah.
Ike quit after he had a massive heart attack.
Hey, that's just in time. Obama, you know, he's, I think, a little taller than Ike. But Eisenhower, military trained. He's been through the ringer of West Point.
Mm-hmm.
Playing football against Jim Thorpe.
Yeah.
Eisenhower, one of our top 5 presidential athletes, fighting in World War I, enduring military training.
That's true.
He's certainly tough. I would think that somewhere in all that military training he learned some hand-to-hand combat skills that I don't think Barack Obama picked up at Harvard Law School.
Well, I mean, honestly, if you're looking at it in their prime, say, you know, what would you say is your prime? Like about 20?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Like, if you look at Ike then, and you look at Obama then, Obama's probably like smoking weed, bogarting the joint, and smoking cigs and partying and shit at that point. Maybe he hadn't rolled over yet into his becoming.
Yeah,
Whereas Ike brought up pretty tough. I think Ike might take it.
Yeah, I think he just has more of a physical toughness to his lifestyle.
Yeah, we'll give it to Ike.
Dwight Eisenhower beating up Barack Obama in this category. Which brings us to the next category. Who would make the best Supreme Court justice?
I went with Millard Fillmore.
I went with Woodrow Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Woodrow Wilson, as our listeners will hear on our next episode, did actually go to law school, trained as a lawyer, didn't really work as a lawyer for more than about 5 minutes, but he did enjoy the law from a theoretical standpoint. And he was quite the academic, writer, speaker. He would certainly have the intellectual capacity to serve on the Supreme Court.
Well, I'm going to argue that Millard Fillmore's intellectual capacity would dwarf Wilson's. Millard Fillmore brought himself up on law books. It was his passion. Fillmore would be a fantastic Supreme Court justice. Probably would have been a better Supreme Court justice than a president.
Perhaps. Yeah, Millard Fillmore spent time as a practicing lawyer.
Indeed.
Actually knows how the law works on a day-to-day basis, Wilson,
And he was not an unsuccessful one.
yeah, kind of brought himself up from nothing into being a very successful lawyer.
That's it.
Wilson, much more of a theoretician.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm leaning towards Fillmore here.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I don't think Wilson's... I don't know. He seems kind of like high and mighty in his attitude. I don't know that that's
Sure.
the best attitude for a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, I think
Tends to get-
Fillmore would be more objective and fair,
Wilson,
balanced.
Wilson tends to get caught up in his own ideals.
He gets caught up in his own passions. Fillmore would be by the letter of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And here we go, 3 more cards, 3 more categories. All right, so we're going to begin with Best Educated. And I went with Theodore Roosevelt.
I went with Rutherford B. Hayes.
Interesting. Now, of course, Teddy Roosevelt was too sickly to attend school in his early youth, but he's going to learn some fundamentals from his aunt, and then other tutors are going to follow. You got to remember the Roosevelts, they're able to provide a nice education for Teddy. He goes on to study in Dresden, Germany, studying German and French under Fraulein Anna Minkwitz, who predicted of her pupil, quote, "He will surely one day be a great professor, or who knows, he may become President of the United States." Then Harvard follows. Vice President of the Natural History Club, editor of The Advocate, founder of the Finance Club, and still finds time to write and lecture before the Ornithological Club. Also runner-up for the Campus Lightweight Boxing Championship. Throw that in there.
That's true. And then TR went on to Columbia Law School for about a year before he was elected to the state legislature and
That's
left
it.
law school. Rutherford B. Hayes, he attended Kenyon College in Ohio, where he was a good student, and then went on to Harvard Law School, and I believe was the first president to graduate from law school. So both of these guys with the Harvard connection.
Indeed.
I don't know. I think I might give it to TR for
I
his
feel
more
like I would-
varied education.
I feel like I would give it to TR because he's going overseas and getting tutored, learning other languages.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting a lot more, just by virtue of his family.
Yeah.
Rutherford B. Hayes, a nice education, but TR just had more available to him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, moving on, most accomplished vice president. Now, this was a tough one for me.
I went with Warren Harding, whose vice president is Calvin Coolidge.
And I went with Abraham Lincoln, who has Hannibal Hamlin and Andrew Johnson.
Wow.
Neither of which really say too awful much. Johnson, accomplishment. I mean, he became president upon Lincoln's death. Is that an accomplishment? Not really.
Well,
And
I
then
think-
it was
yeah.
not a great presidency.
Well, this category is theoretically
Up to the
their
point they became vice
right.
president.
Well, and including their vice presidency.
Okay, well, I mean, that helps Johnson, kind of.
Well, his vice presidency somewhat ignominious
Yeah,
for his drunken
yeah.
inaugural speech.
That's why I said kind of.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
He did serve valiantly as military governor of Tennessee and maintained loyalty to the Union,
Mm-hmm.
and was previously senator and governor of Tennessee.
Yeah. And as to Hamlin, he got dumped from the ticket because he was seen as being too radical.
Well, maybe a good thing when you're comparing yourself to Andy Johnson.
Well,
You want to be a little bit more radical Republican than him. Warren Harding, of course, had Calvin Coolidge, who, up to the time of his vice presidency, he had just served as governor of Massachusetts, where he was best known for breaking the police strike of 1919. He was also lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, a state senator, a mayor, a very distinguished career leading up to his vice presidency.
Yeah, I mean, Calvin Coolidge definitely had a nice rise. I guess we should touch a little bit on Hannibal Hamlin. He was a lawyer who entered politics as a Democrat but broke ranks over the slavery issue, joining the Republican Party and serving in the Maine legislature 1836 to 1841 and in the U.S. House 1843 to 1847. He was briefly the first Republican governor of Maine, but there was a little bit of an issue with him. Because of his swarthy complexion, rumors began to spread during the 1860 campaign that he was half black.
Wow.
Yeah. Despite that, Lincoln wins. And as vice president, he does not a whole lot. He spends very little time presiding over the Senate. He's a staunch abolitionist and supports vigorous prosecution of the war. He actually, in 1864, at the age of 55, enlisted as a private in the Maine Coast Guard, and he served for 2 months as a cook. And, of course, much to his chagrin, he gets dumped for the ticket because he's too radical Republican, and they need Andy Johnson to fill the void. I mean, Coolidge wins. I felt we should say something about Hannibal Hamlin.
Yeah, we like Coolidge in this category.
Indeed.
He's going to take the cake here.
And that's going to bring us to most underrated, in which we have to refer to this silly poll.
Well, we're going with the C-SPAN historians' amalgamation of rankings to determine who is rated what. And then we will compare this with our choices, which I went with Richard Nixon.
I went with William Howard Taft.
This list puts William Howard Taft at number 24 out of 43, and Richard Nixon coming in at 28.
Okay. Well, Nixon is more underrated on this list than Taft, I would think.
I confess that I went with Richard Nixon because I know that Stephen Lincoln Douglas is a big Nixon proponent who,
Well, that's not necessarily true.
who believes that he is underrated.
Well, he is underrated. He's underrated. I mean, that's not to take away from his faults.
Yeah. Well, that's the trick with
Tricky Dick.
with ranking Tricky Dick, because if you look at the Watergate and all of that stuff on one hand, and then you got all the substance of his presidency on the other hand, where he was pretty successful. And I think we probably said it on the podcast before. If those Watergate burglars had never been caught, Nixon could very well be down in history as a top 10 president.
Yeah.
But then you have to balance that against the disgrace of resigning the presidency.
That's absolutely right. Taft, he is a middle-of-the-road president. He is. He belongs in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps closer to the top of the middle than to the bottom of the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, 24 within one or two spaces, that's fair.
Yeah, that's probably close for him.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I see several people on here who I would rate ahead of, or who I would put Taft ahead of, but...
Yeah, but who would you put Nixon ahead of, more importantly?
Yeah, this list puzzlingly has Jimmy Carter at number 26, ahead of Nixon and Calvin Coolidge, which is crazy. It also has People who are ahead of Taft, including Grover Cleveland, Ulysses Grant, John Quincy Adams.
I could see Cleveland, but Grant, John Quincy Adams.
Well, I mean, Grant is kind of enjoying a resurgence of reputation.
He is.
I don't know who's clamoring for John Quincy Adams to be recognized as a great president.
Yeah.
And then you've also got some somewhat outliers like Barack Obama at number 12, Lyndon Johnson, Woodrow Wilson, who are like really high.
Yeah.
I don't know about those.
Yeah, there's some interesting spots on this list. I would actually say that Nixon is probably, based on this list, more underrated than Taft. Based on this list.
Mm-hmm.
And I would give it to him.
I'll give it to Tricky Dick.
That's it. I mean, you got to go based off the list.
The guy who the Canadians called Tricky Taft. As our listeners recall.
That's right. Well, I mean, I don't know. With Nixon, he was a piece of shit. A human being. But, some of the things he did as president were all right. All right, so 3 more interesting choices to make. Let's see what we got here. First up, who would make the best Treasury Secretary? I went with Grover Cleveland.
I went James Garfield.
Okay, my basis for Cleveland was all the vetoes. He's trying to stop irresponsible spending. Mm-hmm. He's a smart guy. He's wielding the veto like a battle axe, as we've said. Mm-hmm. I think he'd be a sound Secretary of the Treasury because he would be fiscally responsible to the T.
Yeah, Cleveland was a staunch gold man, even when many of his party were going into that silver heresy.
Indeed.
Yeah, Cleveland coming in there and ensuring the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act.
Right.
To try to undo some of the bimetallism that was enacted during the Harrison administration.
That's it. I think he would be a very effective Treasury Secretary. I think Garfield would be able, but he just doesn't have the background as we know it that Cleveland would have to perform the task. I think Garfield would probably do a great job. He would dedicate himself to the task as he would anything else. However, I think Cleveland maybe has more of the background.
Yeah.
Well, not even necessarily background. It's just what he did as president. So based on that, I'm kind of making my decision.
Yeah, he has more experiences that resonate with the Treasury Secretary role.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would go with Cleveland also in this category. Which brings us to who would make the best Attorney General? I'm going with James Monroe.
And I'm going with, interestingly enough, John Quincy Adams.
Wow.
So there's a battle, but in this battle, I can't see James Monroe eking out John Quincy Adams. JQA's background kind of made him able. I think he could have done anything, to be completely honest. He could have held like any position in government and probably done a really good job. The only thing that drew him back was his 4 years as president.
Yeah.
That was it. I think any other position he would have held, he would have done a stand-up job. Greatest Secretary of State in the nation's history. What's to keep him from being the best Attorney General in the history of the United States?
Yeah, I mean, he was educated as a lawyer, worked as a lawyer briefly, didn't really like it.
Right.
Went into
there is that.
His diplomatic career, turned down a chance to be on the Supreme Court. So he didn't love the practice of law so much. But the Attorney General position is something that he, I'm sure, could have sunk his teeth into a little bit more.
Yeah.
James Monroe, also educated as a lawyer and practiced as a lawyer. Aaron Burr had a low opinion of Monroe's legal abilities, but Monroe, a very able man, came in as a Secretary of State, Secretary of War, going into whatever task needed to be done and doing a good job at it.
But never seen as like an intellectual highlight amongst his contemporaries, you know.
Made the great decision as president to appoint John Quincy Adams as Secretary of State.
That's it.
And rely on his judgment. I think JQA would probably edge him out in this category.
Yeah, I think that being said, we go JQA. Moving right along to the category of biggest partier. And I went with George W. Bush.
I went with George Washington.
Oh, this is one time that the G-dub is gonna trump the G-dub, baby.
Yeah.
George W. Bush, by far the bigger partier than George Washington.
Definitely.
Washington, yeah, great whiskey manufacturer, you know, big time. Top in the nation for a spell there. But
Yeah.
how
Great.
much was he imbibing?
Well, probably only moderate amounts.
That's it.
He would keep his wits about him. He was a big partier in the sense that all the ladies wanted to dance with George Washington at the parties, and he was happy to oblige. He was an excellent dancer. George W. Bush, far too inebriated to hold his own on a dance floor.
Hey, man, you never know.
More known for dancing on top of the bar.
Yeah.
Or at least he did, I believe, in the Oliver Stone W film.
Well,
Probably not too far from the truth.
you never know. I think in any event,
George Washington never banned from a town
that's yeah,
for pulling down a goalpost.
that's right. G-Dub-B taking it over the OG G-Dub. And 3 more categories and 3 more cards. Well, listeners, I thought perhaps I was slightly fucked here, but perhaps not. We'll see what happens as we proceed with our game of presidential war. Our next category, post-presidential accomplishments.
I went with Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson, and I was very fortunate that earlier on I had used 24th President Grover Cleveland because now I am playing 22nd President Grover Cleveland,
Wow.
whose post-presidential accomplishment was to be re-elected president after 4 years.
Which is pretty impressive
Pretty impressive.
when considered against Andrew Johnson, who was never elected president.
That's correct.
His post-presidential accomplishment was to be elected to the U.S. Senate
Indeed.
by the Tennessee State Legislature,
There is that.
an honorific office that he held briefly before dying.
That's right. Yeah, I was worried initially because I couldn't remember which Grover Cleveland I'd played before. Fortunately,
Well,
it worked out in my favor this time around.
you got the right Cleveland.
Got the right Cleveland,
He's
who's
gonna-
gonna...
Take it from Andy Johnson. here.
Indeed.
And then we're going to follow up post-presidential accomplishments with pre-presidential accomplishments. And I'm going with James Madison.
Whew. And I'm going with Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge, nothing to sneeze at. Had a nice uprising. Never lost an election. Held a lot of local offices, state offices. Governor of Massachusetts. Vice president. A lot going on.
Yeah.
Broke up the Boston police strike. There's a lot going on for him there. But James Madison.
Right. Ironically, Calvin Coolidge's pre-presidential accomplishments already won Warren Harding the category for best vice presidential.
That's right.
Most accomplished vice president. But James Madison is going to triumph here. His pre-presidential accomplishments include having sex with the Constitution's mother and thereby being father of the Constitution.
That's right.
And he served in the Continental Congress, and then as one of the leaders of the first Congress, an architect of the federal government, as well as, of course, the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And then went on to become Secretary of State.
That's it.
Under Thomas Jefferson. And he's going to take it from Calvin Coolidge here.
Indeed.
Which brings us to the category of looks. Who is the best looking president out of these two? I've got Franklin Roosevelt.
I've got William McKinley.
Now, if you're talking strictly from the waist down, William McKinley seems more appealing.
Yeah? Yeah, there's something about McKinley there in his younger days. He's got them deep set eyes. There's enigmatic, mysterious man. And he was able-bodied. Look at his exploits in the Civil War, if you'll remember from episode 25. Hanging onto the side of a horse. Getting messages through. Being bad.
Quite a young man.
Yeah, if you look at it in those days. McKinley is a young man. Not a bad-looking dude. FDR, okay.
I think FDR's pretty good looking. As a young man. With striking features before he was brought low by the polio.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty handsome.
Yeah, William McKinley, he always a bit on the hefty side there, but not too shabby, a little bit roguish almost in his youth, and then of course he turns into the Wizard of Oz later on.
Mm-hmm.
FDR, fine and trim,
Looking very dapper.
Indeed, a dapper, distinguished gentleman.
Wearing his family's money on his countenance.
Indeed. And based on that, we'll give it to FDR.
Yeah. I think FDR is going to outlook William McKinley.
That's it.
Neither of those two were chosen for the post-presidential accomplishments category.
Correct. And 3 more coming up. Alrighty, first up we have biggest election victories.
I'm going with Franklin Pierce.
I went with William Henry Harrison. Let's consult the complete book of U.S. presidents and look up the final election tallies.
Franklin Pierce, in the 1852 election, went up against the Whig candidate Winfield Scott. Franklin Pierce winning 51% of the popular vote against only 44 for Scott. Pierce dominating with 254 electoral votes against only 42 for Winfield Scott. A devastating victory for
Indeed.
Pierce.
As for Harrison, Harrison would win 53% of the popular vote to Van Buren's 47%. Electorally, Harrison carried 234 electoral votes, Van Buren 60.
Wow.
A pretty huge victory. The old log cabin and hard cider campaign paying off. But in terms of the time and the population, Pierce's was the bigger victory, I believe.
Yeah, maybe, but not by that much.
No, not by very much at all. It was closer than I actually thought it would be.
Yeah,
I knew they had both won pretty big, but
Pierce edging it out slightly.
Mm-hmm.
Neither man really enjoying the fruits of their victory.
Right.
Harrison by dying almost immediately, and Pierce by squandering the popular mandate he received
Yeah.
and landing himself somehow below William Henry Harrison in rankings of the presidents.
That's right.
But he will win this category.
Yep. That's just it.
Perhaps his best category besides the looks category.
Yeah, perhaps. That's going to bring us to First Lady Accomplishment.
I went with Ulysses S. Grant, who's bringing Julia Grant to the party.
And I went with John F. Kennedy, who's got Jackie Kennedy, Onassis, to bring to the table. And in terms of the popular culture, Jackie Kennedy. Come
Yeah.
on.
Jackie Kennedy, an icon.
Jackie
of a
O,
First Lady.
as she was later known, you know.
Yeah.
That in and of itself was an accomplishment. I mean, she didn't really have to do much more than be there.
She captured the hearts of America.
Indeed, it was Camelot.
Her giving a tour of the White House was must-see TV.
That's right. I think
She
it
became-
would have been like, you know, if there was live television when Grace Coolidge was First Lady. There hadn't been that kind of national adoration for the First Lady, I don't think, since Grace Coolidge.
Yeah.
I mean, Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, but that went far beyond looks and culture and
Yeah. Jackie raising young children and giving birth while First Lady. As recalled on our top 5 tragic presidential child deaths.
indeed.
Surviving that and then sitting next to her husband on a particular car ride in Dallas
Yeah,
where her First Ladyship came to an end.
yeah,
But serving valiantly through that tragedy as well.
indeed.
Julia Grant, not as accomplished. She loved being First Lady, loved being hostess of the White House. Perhaps her greatest contribution was prior to First Lady when she hated Mary Todd Lincoln so much that the Grants refused an invitation to the theater
Yeah.
on one fateful night.
Not a bad accomplishment
Yeah.
in hindsight. But I still think we got to go Jackie Kennedy.
Yeah, I think Jackie's gonna take this one. Which brings us to the category, who would make the best legislator?
I went with James K. Polk.
I went with Gerald Ford.
Okay.
2 presidents with very distinguished House careers.
Indeed. I think in terms of commitment to work, Polk.
Yeah, Polk's certainly a workaholic and obviously a very effective legislator, making
Yeah.
his way all the way to Speaker of the House,
Yeah.
the only president, or rather the only Speaker of the House to ever become president.
That's right.
He was a integral House leader during Andrew
During
Jackson's
a really
presidency.
turbulent time. Yeah, Andrew Jackson's presidency. That's pretty big.
He's part of the reason why Jackson was so successful in getting his
Agenda
way. Yeah.
pushed through. Yeah, absolutely. Polk is definitely reliable in that regard. Nothing against Jerry Ford. I think he would be totally able
Yeah.
and he would do very well. But I just think in this instance, he's going up against James K. Polk.
Yeah. Ford was really well respected. Obviously, so much that when the vice presidency became vacant, his colleagues basically insisted that Nixon appoint him.
That's right. I mean, that has to be said. You know, he was thought well of. He was held in high regard for them to consider that. That's a pretty huge decision.
Yeah.
Be that as it may, I still don't know that I'd give him the edge over Polk.
No. Yeah, I think few presidents made as much of a mark in the legislature as Polk.
No, you'd be hard pressed.
He's going to take it. Which brings us to our final card and our final category. it could all come down to this.
It could.
And the category is, who would make the best military general?
Oh, boy.
And I've got Martin Van Buren.
And I've got Bill Clinton.
Wow. Two men who have nothing military about them.
Mm-mm.
That is a very interesting matchup.
I could almost see, like, in a World War II movie, like, you know, like John Wayne's, like, playing, like, say he's playing, like, a colonel or something, and there's a general ahead of him that's, like, a real jerk.
Mm-hmm.
He's, like, chomping on a cigar, and he's like, say, where are all them French women at?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Both of these guys, very talented politicians.
Yeah.
I don't know that either of them really has much to recommend himself.
In terms of the military, not too much.
Both
Clinton would look better in the role than MVB. Just
MVB would look pretty Napoleonic.
yeah, but like the opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a Napoleon of like the backroom political realm.
Yeah.
But on a battlefield, I don't know. I don't think it would go too well for him. Clinton, I mean, I don't think it would go great, but I think he would be better suited than Martin Van Buren.
I'll think of it this way. I mean, these two are both very much like career politicians.
Right.
Clinton's career of politics was all like promoting himself. Like, he was always the number one. He was the attorney general, the governor, the president. He's, like, good at getting himself up levels.
Right, whereas MVB was Jackson.
MVB is a great organizer.
Yeah.
Like, he puts together a machine.
Right.
Which I think could analogize more to, like, an army.
Yeah. I mean, can see that.
I think he's a proven organizer in a way that Clinton...
Yeah, kind of like I said, Clinton, you know, he'd be the guy. Mm-hmm. Say, we took over this town. That's real good. There are any women in there, you know, that need, you know, consoling?
Yeah. I think Van Buren would be...
I could tell them that I feel their pain.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Van Buren in terms of organization and logistics would probably be great behind the scenes. If you're thinking of like classic general, like leading on a horse in the field of battle, but if you're thinking more of like strategery,
and I mean, I think that's more what a general would really be doing.
Yeah, in this day and age, absolutely. Let's give it to MVB.
Yeah, I think I would.
I think he would take it.
Yeah, MVB. With an unlikely military victory.
Indeed. That's going to bring us to the card count. And we're back with the results.
The cards have been counted, and I have 20.
And I finished with 24, making me, for only the fourth time in the history of presidential war, the victor. Now, this might be the point where you'd expect me to gloat, but I've been studying the 8 virtues of the Avatar, and one of which is humility.
Crushing victory.
Me, the champion of war, bound now. And I kicked your ass until it was sore, bound now. 'Cause I am the champion. I am the champion. No time for James J. Hamilton. 'Cause Stephen Lincoln Douglas is the champion of war. So, I shan't gloat about this victory. For only the second time in history, Stephen Lincoln Douglas has triumphed in presidential war. Standing victorious over his vanquished foe, James J. Hamilton, he appears to be quite pleased with himself. Give a wave to the camera, Steve. That's right. And I shan't boast about it. And let me tell you something. James J. Hamilton, he come in here, he ain't got no style, he ain't got no class, he ain't got no game, he ain't got no wit. He clumsy, he dressed like a knucklehead. And I'm a bad man. 'Cause after all, the real winner is you, our listener.
Yeah, you should be gloating at home for
That's right.
finishing another episode of Presidential War.
That's right, and with all the fun ways to play, it's always a bit different. That's Presidential War, and this is the Dead Presidents Podcast, for which I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I am James J. Hamilton.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting installment of Presidential War.